Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Food Safety Data Documentation Requirements. Most food companies are ill-prepared for Food and Drug Administration or United States Department of Agriculture Food Safety and Inspection Service post-incident plant inspection, or aligns with the Food Safety Modernization Act regulatory requirements. For trying to wade through reams of food quality, specification, and performance data, the journey into data black hole. This webinar is designed to delineate the food safety and quality data that food companies currently collect and sort out the important from the unimportant, as we instruct investigative pathways for companies' data minefield. Specifically, center will teach attendees how to develop a data collection strategy, under governmental regulatory data requirements, discern clean from contaminated data, identify vital missing data, create a flow diagram, sort out vagrant misinformation, finally, develop a plaintiff or defendant questioning strategy to validate the case theory or disprove errant theories. The speaker for today's program is Dr. Darrel Suderman. Dr. Suderman is the president of Food Technical Consulting and has worked for manufacturing and leading restaurant chains for over 20 years. 7 years, Dr. Suderman has served as an expert witness and consultant for both plaintiff and defense attorneys throughout the United States. Dr. Suderman received his Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science degrees in Agricultural Education and his PhD in Food Science from Kansas State University. 2 U.S. patents, covered a food processing book, and has over 40 peer-reviewed and magazine articles and white papers. He worked in research and development, quality assurance, and food safety for many of the leading restaurant chains, including KFC, Good Market, Church Chicken, Quiznos, Kennedy's, Filet, and Wendy's International. Dr. Suderman co-founded Business IQ LLC, a business intelligence IT consulting company, which has been accepted as an official partner of SAP Software Company. A few of his clients have included Foster Farms, Benio Turkey Store, Golden Plump Poultry, Johnsonville Sausage, and Gallo Winery, Tyson's Food, and Organic Valley. We take 2 question and answer breaks during today's program. If question, please use the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll do our best to answer the questions in the order in which they come in. I will send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this program. We ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after today's program is over. I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. Turn the presentation over to our distinguished guest, Dr. Darrel Suderman. Darrel, the program is now all yours.
I want to welcome everyone to the seminar today. I did this title to highlight the fact that relevant data for food safety litigation cases can be found in 100 different locations. And unless you know what is available, you may miss the opportunity to place your case in a win column versus a loss column. IT consultants call this process data mining. I am IT systems because I have spent almost 10 years as a manufacturing and supply chain management consultant. I recently joined an industry organization, nonprofit I might add, called MESA, to help develop a food safety guidelines handbook for food manufacturers on an international basis. I hope that you will feel free to send Matt a lot of questions during our discussion today. I also picked this topic because it is my favorite subject: benefits of software data mining systems litigation. The presentation will have 2 parts. The presentation will introduce you to various types of data, data formats, and case-relevant data. It answers the questions who, what, when, and where. The second half of the presentation walks through 3 separate case examples. They represent case applications. Once we know the data is available, we can apply the data to our cases. I go through this slide because Matt's already covered it. On this slide, what I've done is list a few of the webinars and magazine articles that I've done for TASA over the past 3 years. In 2010, we had a webinar called Protecting Food and Beverage Recipe and Process Ownership. A year later, in 2011, we had a webinar entitled Emerging Issues in Food Product Litigation. And in 2012, the webinar was entitled Top 5 Consumer Liability Risks the Public Ignores. List one article that was published in Lawyer Magazine the summer of 2011 entitled Public Safety Liability for Mobile Food Retailers and Quick Serve Restaurants. This is out the agenda for my presentation today. As you can see, my presentation uses a case strategy, quote unquote, as the basis for determining what data will be needed to build your litigation case strategy, defend your strategy, and prepare what-if scenarios during the case execution. I use the same approach in my new product innovation consulting part of my business. In situations, I use the term strategate, or ideation sessions that fit within the boundaries of a strategy. So I believe in the strategy both in case involvements and in food consulting. After this, I plan to discuss types of data content, data format, data reports, data locations within a food plant, regulatory data requirements. This is, interestingly, that I've been working on strategy. So maybe this will help you. And so when you contact an expert witness, you have a little bit more basis to kind of frame the case, what your kind of goals and strategies going to be, and so hopefully that'll be the case. To understand the types of data can be found within a restaurant chain or a food manufacturing company, it's important to understand the categories of food safety data. And I've listed a few very general categories in this slide. Those categories include 1, national, federal, state, and local required regulatory compliance data. Food safety data that might include microbiological and foreign material. 3 would be HACCP, hazard analysis and critical control point, product temperature, metal detection. Is equipment performance, such as metal detectors and downtime. And performance would include quality control or process control. Lastly, production performance. It would be understanding how much downtime was going on in a plant or on a particular production line. And that generally refers to maintenance issues or cases that would involve some kind of maintenance problem. This diagram to help people understand the different, what I call shields, layers of food safety protection for the U.S. consumer. On the previous slide, I started my list by naming local, state, national, and international regulatory data that is required by government agencies and expected to be archived. When a company's food safety system is working well, regulatory oversight of these laws represent layers of food safety protection or shields of protection for children, for parents, and for aging parents. I wanted to depict on this slide 5 layers of safety protection and for food eaten by school children and for the USDA child nutrition regulations. If a company complies with these regulatory requirements, they are protected legally. But if they fail, then subject to plant shutdowns and devaluation. To a couple of points. Keep also that the regulations do not fit every process scenario. Now look at the slide. The center slide refers to school children customers. Then the second layer refers to meat quality control HACCP programs. That investigate a case, I need to kind of go through this checklist to find out if those systems were all in place, what the result from when they were not in place. Then the third layer is the USDA inspection of child nutrition donated meat. In other words, people say, well, the meat isn't safe. Well, it has to be inspected by the USDA inspector. That's one of the things we're looking for in that situation. There would be the child nutrition quality programs, which are mandated by the government. The fourth would be a U.S. grader inspection, and fifth would be USDA inspector in charge inspection. In other words, that is the USDA authority that's in a plant that's actually monitoring the product while it's being processed and manufactured. So I don't list the regulatory requirements by chance first. This is always the thing that you want to start out first, and if those things were in place. If they weren't in place, that opens up a lot of opportunities to investigate different data, to gather data to fit the strategy, to see what has failed, what else has failed within the plan. Particular slide, I thought it might be interesting to understand all the different regulatory agencies that need to be kind of sorted through on different food litigation cases. You have international, federal, state, and local regulatory data that and monitoring it needs to take place. And you're probably more familiar with USDA and FDA, but the USDA is also responsible for an emerging growth area in the United States, and that is organic food market. And another point of information is the circle on the top column to the right. She gives the plant inspection number. An incident may have happened. And on the second line, I have the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And bottom line, I include the international scope of things. Left side, KFEI, refers to the food standards in Korea. I was just there a couple weeks ago making a presentation. And in the center, it talks about international HACCP compliance. And there are some countries, such as Korea, that have decided to set in place a HACCP program, but really haven't went as far as what we have in the United States so far. And so I just wanted to kind of make you aware of, in a lot of ways, the U.S. Sets a standard on an international basis. Probably the one that follows us most closely then it would be the bottom right hand would be Canada and their food inspection service that they have there. Just national and federal regulatory standards are reference standards only. The expert witness must compare actual data against the standard and make a judgment of non-compliance or compliance. I think this slide pretty much speaks for itself. Slide, I've said different food safety data format and databases. This slide illustrates the types of food safety data formats and databases. It includes electronic data that ranges from Word documents, videos, Excel flat file data, barcodes, journals that are handwritten, nutritional databases, and HMI machine databases, and computers or iPads. I'll mention HMI again, but that means human machine interface. Talk a little bit more where that kind of data evolved. So when you start working on a case in the food industry, like I'm kind of demonstrating here, there's data in so many places, and probably most people scratch the surface. They're trying to research a case, and that's my whole purpose for showing this. And then on the bottom right-hand side of the, you see wording at the bottom that says Plan for series data, and it's data that's being collected on a production line, second or millisecond type of basis. So that this is a way of gathering information to know if this person has fallen off or if there's some kind of a problem in the production line. On the side, it shows other data formats and databases to include that. It may include crystal reports, recording sensors, GPS tracking devices for distribution trucks, and enterprise performance reporting. The top line in the middle actually is temperature recorders that go into food products. We did this a lot in the restaurant business when we were trying to monitor the temperature of trucks that were carrying our produce particularly, because if temperature got up above 40 degrees, it would cut our shelf life down a whole day in the stores. So these are all different types of data that are currently being tracked or could be tracked. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you see a kind of a computer screen with different pie charts and bar graphs and various things like that. And that is an example of what I spoke of earlier as being crystal reports. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I don't want you to get too concerned about the different acronyms I'm using, because at the end of this slide presentation, I have a couple pages of acronyms that with the definition, and you can that once the seminar is over today. Data can be formatted electronically and manually. I mentioned before and located in many, many diverse databases. It can be written in notebooks. It can be in flat files, and that refers to spreadsheets like Excel spreadsheets. It can be in what they call relational databases within a food manufacturing plant, or relational databases. And relational databases means is you can take two pieces of information that are somewhat related to each other and look at them to see the words at a certain time during the production period. What else was going on that would have affected the outcome of that production that was being made. And so we look at the relationships between different data opportunities within particular production plant. A lot of information is rolled up to the top in data warehouses or data marts. And without knowing where that information is, it's very difficult to ask questions about, well, by the way, I think you have some performance data that's in your data mart that's generated by the HMI, which is a touch screen at the production plant. And by the way, was working that day, was his responsibilities, or was someone not working during that period of time? And then that's what I mean, that you can really dig down a lot deeper. Reports, I've mentioned the word reports because this is data that you as an attorney can access or request when you're trying to depose information. And reports can be several different things. One, they can be a handwritten page, or it could be an MS Microsoft Word typed document of some sort. It could be a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, a document, in other words. Or it could be HTML documents, net printouts. Reports, crystal reports, are based on SAP's Business Objects platform, and you can create reports to fit different formats that you want. This slide is data collection must fit the crime. And what about working on cases and start working on them? My goal is always first and foremost to define the crime. In other words, what happened, where are we pursuing it? And once I define that, is to define the data collection strategy. So once I know the crime, I'll figure out what kind of data that I need to collect. And the following 6 points are that kind of listing of that kind of data. That includes food safety, quality assurance, quality control, business intelligence, process data, info data. There's a lot of information on a barcode when it even comes to labeling problems that can be clarified or further just by getting at the barcode information. A lot of information on that. Been working on a case. Here's some examples of questions that I ask or that you can ask or your expert witness can ask is, where's the data located? The scope of the whole plant. And we want to show you later, I have another slide that talks about the whole supply chain. In other words, from the moment the ingredients arrive at a production facility or to a restaurant to the time they're put into the manufacturing line. And maybe it's a seasoning that goes into a meatball and you're trying to make a finished product meatball. It's packaged, it's put in boxes, it's put on pallets, it goes into a warehouse and then to a distribution center. That whole supply chain, where is the data located? Who's responsible for collecting that data? In other words, who owns that data? Another way of saying that might be, who is responsible for the security of that data? Another bullet point I have here is who controls access to the data and what data changes are allowed and by whom. And a lot of times you are looking for data or collecting the data where someone puts it into a report. It could be a report of some sort and someone has to sign it and then someone's supervisor has to sign that too. That's what I mean. Who controls access to the data? And what changes are allowed. And that should be a lot of times time-stamped too. If it's not, it raises a question in my mind. The bullet point is, what is the data format? And then parts of the data is in compliance with regulations and what's out of compliance. Reports are generated internally that can help my case. I have a slide, how to depose data. And one of the ways to do that is to follow the data strategy that you've developed. Ask questions like, who is the keeper of the keys, so to speak? Who maintains the security of data that is important for a case? And compare to regulatory standards as often as possible. Always becomes kind of the gold standard. What are the regulatory standards? What are the laws? What are the regulations that we're up against? And then to communicate data reports in a very understanding way. Data determines who to depose. If it's a microbiological case, as a microbiologist or quality assurance manager, director, or VP would be the person that we want to try to get information from during the deposition. Induction issue. It would be the plant manager or the chief information officer or quality control. If it's a safety issue, it might be a different set of people, such as the food safety manager, the quality assurance, or the CEO of a company. And when it comes to compliance program, for the CEO needs to be aware of what's going on, plus different team leaders, such as an incident response team that may be in place that reports to the CEO. Some for that kind of information too. And who owns the data? Data ownership equates to product ownership or a department head. Under the 2011 Food Safety Modernization Act, the federal government has open access to information that a food manufacturer or restaurant has within their business. Data for internal terrorism be another thing, and by that means someone that would purposely change or destroy data or try to exit it out of a plant facility. Before, data must fit the case strategy. If it is a foreign metal object, then collected detector data, use handwritten experts, handwriting experts if needed. The reason I mention this is I worked on a case this last year where as I dug through the data and information that the food company had supplied, I quickly came to the realization that the metal detection information was handwritten and entered after the fact of the incident. Once we made clear and had the data, the evidence to support that, needless to say, the case closed down pretty quick. I think within a week. And the only reason that I even began questioning that is that over the 20-some years that I worked in food manufacturing plants, I wasn't in any kind of a regulatory law rule or anything like that, but I seen that happen before. And there's just tremendous pressure on quality assurance people to let management make them believe that everything is accurate. The line is running as it should. No one wants to lose their job, and there's a lot of pressure on these people, so it's always good to use a handwriting expert if you need to see if some of the signature and the data is accurate. If it's microbiological, and collecting technical information like food temperature, pH, acidity, and water activity are important. In fact, they're very important because it determines whether the environment was right for organisms to be growing. And resource external independent laboratories is needed, whether that be through a physical analysis with a microscope, it's determine whether meat has been cooked and protein has been denatured. And everything must support the strategy, as I mentioned. That kind of summarizes what I was talking about previously. The scope of data strategy as relates to supply chain. And what it does is it shows in the upper left-hand corner is farm puts. It could be collecting, cutting lettuce out of the fields in Salinas, California, hand, and goes into a food processing plant. That's monitored for, that's where the product is actually washed, and cut, and cleaned, then packaged and going on to pallets in supply train trucks. It always helps your case to look at the whole supply chain because what I have found, whether it's food manufacturing and restaurants, is that if there's a problem, I've seen it so many times in a restaurant, that is very apparent that food is unsafe or improperly prepared in a restaurant, there's usually about 6 or 7 other steps before that were all wrong also. There's always seems to be a chain of events. That's what I'm suggesting here is that when you work on different cases, you get the whole supply chain. What are the benefits of a data strategy? I did a few. You could probably list a lot more than what I have, but one of the benefits is that it creates and follows an efficient strategic plan. The locations and databases can be identified. The strategic plan identifies key personnel interviews, including database stakeholders. Another benefit is that it exposes data gaps between personnel and departments and regulatory agencies. And this is always a prime opportunity for an expert witness to analyze and determine what those gaps are, why did they happen, and was something trying to be covered up. A good data strategy also creates a well-defined project timeline. It uses expert witness time. It fits a plan. It reduces expert witness costs because the work is more efficient. It creates a more effective court presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt, and he can talk any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you, Darrel. We do have some questions in the queue. I would like to invite all the attendees to submit their questions by using either the chat or Q&A feature, which are both found on the right-hand side of the screen. Does the federal government or do state governments mandate a uniform data format or data collection tool, or is it kind of whatever the manufacturer is using, they can submit a report from that tool?
the first answer, an easy answer, is that individual companies can pretty much collect the data in the format that they want. But there's been a slow progression with the industry to go to electronic signatures, and that happened during Jimmy Clinton's presidency, and that is gaining more and more traction in the industry. Industry as a whole is moving slowly and more progressively towards electronic data management, collection, and reporting. But when they move forward, government has to move forward, and sometimes they're the slow on the river, so to speak.
Okay, here's another question from Joe, who asks, when looking for food safety data, what are the individual role differences between a QA manager and a QC manager?
That's a good question, because it's confusing even within the industry, and I don't think a lot of the companies really brought clarity to that. But here's how I describe it. The quality control manager's responsibility to ensure that the production of the products are consistently in compliance with the product specification. Now you contrast that with a quality assurance manager who has responsibility to develop and monitor corporate governance business rules. In other words, the quality control is always, is the production line running as it should? Is it running in control? Where quality assurance is more of setting programs in place and making sure that they're set and they're in compliance with regulations. Then we get into a food safety manager. Their role is to develop and implement business practices to prevent food poisoning, adulteration, personal injury, or contamination once the product cases are opened in the store. So that's how I define things, and I think if you use that differentiation to collect data on different cases that you're working on, it'll bring a lot more clarity to your data collection and help you communicate to your judge with great definition.
Great, thank you, Darrell. We have a question here from Chris, who asks, if someone files a lawsuit claiming that they became ill because they consumed a contaminated food product, is there any mandatory reporting the defendant must do to any governmental entity, regardless of the validity of the claim?
I don't have the exact examples in front of me right now, but there's certain situations where if it is life-threatening, that they would have to at least fill out a form, notify the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia. And I know that because I'm working on a case now where that was a situation that happened. And the answer is yes, would be more on an individualized basis.
Okay, and this will be our last question for this Q&A break. We will take a Q&A break at the end of the presentation. Linda asks, you refer to food manufacturing plants, but the same principles apply to restaurants, retail, groceries, stores, kiosks, food trucks, and convenience stores?
Absolutely. All food production venues is the same. A restaurant is a food manufacturing location, but on a much smaller scale. And so the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so why don't we continue on with the presentation of content, Darrell?
Okay. Do a couple examples here, but I want to briefly go over incident information requirements and sample security checklist that I've put together here. And I use this for a lot of expert witness cases that I work on. In my expert witness practice, I use the following checklist to begin my assessment of new cases. The checklist has resulted from 25 years of working in food and beverage manufacturing plants and understanding the hard questions that need to be asked to get the case in the win column. First, once contaminated or adulterated food sample was identified, was placed into a secure environment. And what security management protocol has been put in place to protect the sample's integrity? The sample should be treated as a crime scene evidence. Litigation case success hinges on these questions. Unfortunately, even though I might use the term crime scene evidence, things proceed at a relatively slow pace in food and restaurant instances because product can be packaged, it can be frozen, it can go into refrigerated storage, and it could be anywhere from a week to 2 weeks before a product is eaten and someone gets sick or someone finds a piece of glass or metal in their food product they're eating. But important, if you're working with a client, to try to get that information as soon as possible and to make sure that you set forth very straightforward guidelines as to how that product is going to be, who's going to call who, whether it's the Center for Disease Control needs to be called immediately, whether it's a local health official, and to make sure exactly where that evidence is put into a secure environment. Sometimes people very innocently will send a sample of meat, let's say, that has a piece of metal in it to the manufacturer and never hear anything more from it. But hopefully they will contact an attorney like yourself and be able to give them very quick coaching on how to put that sample into a secure environment, get the legal paperwork in place so that it's very, very clear who's going to be responsible, where that sample is going to be located, and you can preserve the quality and the integrity of that evidence. And then second point, I document as much information as possible regarding the sample incident. Just like a crime investigation reality show, 48 hours, immediate information is always the best information, and I think most of you would agree with me on that. And third point, the pertinent pre-incident information. This presents information that could have affected the outcome of the incident. In other words, temperature abuse of a food prior to incorporating it into the final product recipe would be an example of that. And then document the incident information to categories. By mean, one category could be regulatory abuse, one temperature abuse, another one could be contamination from insects or something like that. And that would be to log post-incident information. Information quite often results from a second round of interviews. It's like fitting the missing pieces of the puzzle together. Pause here for a second. The biggest frustrations as expert witness is the way incident samples are managed or managed. They may collect a sample from the food they ate and send it back to the store or manufacturer, as I mentioned before, without any protection guarantees. They should immediately contact an attorney to determine where to securely, quote-unquote, park it. The remaining 5 steps speak for themselves, and that is number 6, the incident location information. 7, people with incident knowledge. 8, log sequence, events, product recall timeline. 9 would be asked questions regarding data collection frequency and time sequences. And lastly, I've listed here is case-specific federal, state, local regulatory data. These are the top 10 things that I look for when I work on a case all the time. Now, first case example I want to kind of go through and differentiate for the following 2. The types of information you need to collect will be different within different kind of cases. On the previous slide, we discussed general case information gathering. On the next 3 slides, I will discuss more case-specific information. In our first case application example, I selected a case of E. coli, food poisoning. Because it is a food poisoning or adulteration, this case requires very unique data information. As a result, the first question I need to answer is, number 1, what types of data are required? And you can see there's quite a bit of data requirement. It shows the need for a clear and consistent strategy. The second question we need to answer is number 2. Where to find the data? People have knowledge of the contamination. How quickly was the problem identified? And what's been the recall timeline? Microbial contamination has some advantages over physical and contamination cases for litigating attorneys because the client usually becomes sick immediately or within 24 hours. It forces food companies to respond quickly. As expert witness, I looked at adherence to proper sample analysis protocol and adherence to company incident and crisis management protocol. This also tells me a lot about employee training because if they're following protocol, they're well trained. If they don't follow protocol or there's a lot of gaps, that means there's a lot of inconsistencies and employee training has been poor and the company's liability increases. Next I want to discuss is food adulteration. In this category may not be as immediately perishable. Food in this case may be adulterated physically with metal, insects, or glass, or allergen contamination. Although data needs to be collected as micro-contamination, it is time sensitive. And all action is usually corrective action task managed by an incident management team. This adulteration is vital. And as I mentioned here, some of the types of information for a food adulteration case is a lot more focused on production data. Go out into food plants and I'm looking at from beginning to end a product, was room for insect or birds or different other animals that could get into the food supply, and where's the gaps for that. It might be an open door in a plant that birds can fly into, but I'm mainly for production data. In a restaurant, I'm looking for store data, equipment detection data, such as detectors. It can say, someday I'm going to have to give a presentation on just metal detectors, but I have a good friend that's a chief engineer at one of the metal detection companies in the United States, and I think if people really knew what goes on in a metal detector, you could win just about every case because it's not as secure as what you might think. And when it comes to food adulteration, I'm also looking for where's that information located, who are people with knowledge, who were some of the decision makers deciding where that information was stored, so to speak, or parked, and then what is the data collection frequency and the time sequence data that was involved. The third metal foreign object. The best case example that I mentioned here is specific to metal foreign object. The type of information is a bit different from previous sample cases in that I'm looking for documentation that the SSOP, or the Standard Sanitation Operating Plan, that needs to be put in place before production line starts every morning on a production shift or throughout the day, was followed. Are the HACCP activity logs up to date? And have maintenance management activity logs been filled out accurately and not been changed? Unfortunately, I have seen data logs, as I mentioned before, filled out after the fact and filled out with false information. The industry has been slow, as I mentioned before, to collect electronic data. I've listed the benefits of a well-thought-out data collection strategy. That also saves time spent by an expert witness. In short, it represents a well-defined strategic data collection plan, followed by the points identified on the slide. First and foremost, the benefits, as we mentioned before, they create and follow an efficient strategic plan. 2, data locations and databases are identified, and when it comes to databases, it's being clearly identified as to what type of data is available on each one of the databases. 3, strategic plan identifies key personnel interviews, including database stakeholders. And it exposes data gaps between personnel and departments and regulatory agencies. It creates well-defined timelines, reduces expert witness time and cost, and creates a more effective court presentation. This is the end of my presentation today, and I'm open to questions that you might have that are more maybe case-specific.
Thank you so much, Darrel. We have a couple of questions in the queue, and we're going to get to them right away. Cool. When you say time sequence data, what do you mean?
Sequence data is, it's, for example, when they meet patty production line, and a machine is running and knocking out, and forming and making, stamping out hamburger patties, such maybe 200 a minute. What the patties do then is they will go down a conveyor belt and across the scale. It's so fast that what it does is it collects the weight of those patties a fraction of a second as they're passing along. Or it can be other kinds of data. So that's what I mean by time series data. It's data that is attached to a second or a fraction of a second. And it's not logged, it's not written down, but it's great data to have if there's a problem and a litigation opportunity, because it's going to be information that just isn't available anywhere else in the plant.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here from Greg, who asks, if you were to start a case and develop your strategy, first place you would start in the plant? What information?
Well, it kind of depends on whether it's an adulteration case, such as an insect or something like that, or a bird. I then look at the facilities first before I look at a production line, and look at the production line second. I worked on a case like that. That's kind of the process we follow. If it's something that has food poisoning to it, by that I mean it would be something like E. coli or Clostridium perfringens, organisms like that. Then I'm going to be looking at more any step of the process that has to do with heat, because heat is what kills those organisms. And if there was a soup being made, for example, in a steam-jacketed kettle, I'm going to be looking for production data on what the temperature of the soup was and what the heating curve and the cooling curve of that product is. So that's what I was trying to get across in case 1, 2, and 3. Each case, you're going to start looking at different things based on the needs of that case. Makes your time very efficient also. Okay,
in the first part of the presentation, briefly discussed the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011. That act affects data collection and the types of data that are collected by companies.
Well, the most immediate impact is food processors are increasingly required to collect, document, store greater amounts of information. And they will need to comply. It's going to need to be electronic in electronic format, and that's the change it's going to have. It's they're requiring real-time information, and food manufacturing company has to have systems in place, IT systems in place that are going to collect that time information and then put it into real-time reports, as I was mentioning earlier, whether that's graphs, barcodes, but if it's a food poisoning case, time is of the essence. And the government isn't going to hesitate to close a plant down, but if you can show them that everything was running well and there was some other aberration, you might be able to save yourself from having a plant shut down and saving the name of your company.
The second part of the presentation, you talked about the immense amount of information that is present in the barcode. Do you go over for the attorneys and attendants what information can be gleaned from a barcode?
Okay, there's two kinds of a barcode. One is basically the manufacturer, address, and every information of a food product that's being made. That's one part of it. It doesn't necessarily tell you a lot, although it's important to know who made the product. Secondly, it is the descriptors that go into the barcode. These barcodes are generated by a company called G1, I think it's called. And the second part of the barcode is left for the manufacturer to put specification factors into that barcode. In other words, it might be a package size that presents a difference in a barcode. Maybe the same product, but the package size. Or it could be in other words, it could be a teriyaki flavor versus a onion garlic flavor. And so it depends upon the manufacturer as to how much detail they want to put into it. But usually what happens is that a food company has many, let's say hundreds or maybe 1,000 different food products. They have to be a lot more fine-tuned because that information then, as it goes across the retail scanner, will the store what to order, and those are the distinguishing characteristics. So it's in a summary, the first of the barcode is who the manufacturer is and information about that manufacturing company. And second is the level of detail the food manufacturer chooses to distinguish one product he sells from another.
Okay, great. We've gotten a couple questions into the queue that ask about a post-incident report. What components should be included in a post-incident report, and who should the attorney go to get that information from?
You know, post-incident report affects a summary of the incident response team. And generally, a company has someone designated who is that person. And set up correctly, there's been a lot of talk about this recently in Food Safety magazines. That team and that person needs to report directly to the CEO. So you kind of ask around. It could be a senior member of the purchasing team that manages the incident report. It could be the vice president of manufacturing. Hence, it will be someone with a title that comes out of the quality assurance or the food safety department of an organization. So the question is a good one. You need to ask who leads the team and who writes the final report. To what degree was that report distributed within the organization or the company, or was it distributed to anyone outside? Those are the type of questions that need to be managed. The report will have or should have information such as a definition of what the crime was, so to speak, if I can use that term, and where is it detected, what corrective action, and this is a key, what corrective action was taken, what is the timeline for that corrective action. That's the area that I personally really like to dig into, is was any corrective action taken? And even if there is, chances are that it was never done as well as it could have been. And that's just a personal thing, and that's where I generally go into.
Okay, we have a question here from Chris who asks, do you ever communicate with CDC during your evaluation of pending contamination claims? And are they generally cooperative, or do they resist your inquiries?
They have a form to fill out. I know I've worked on a case where got sick at a school function, so to speak, and so the claim was that the food wasn't heated, cooled, and reheated properly, and that kind of thing. In that particular situation, it was filling out a CDC form. No issue about whether it was cooperative or not. It was just a matter of filling out the form, and what they log it, and if anyone has the opportunity to ever tour the CDC in Atlanta, please take the advantage of the opportunity. I've been through it, and there were security checks in getting into an airplane or going through security at an airport. It's well worth seeing. But CDC will only respond if they feel like there is somewhat of a regional danger or something, or if they feel that they've lost control of it at the local level. I've not known of them really to be life hard on people. It's good to follow the process.
They've had some questions come in about training for QAs, QCs, and food safety managers. Is there a curriculum or certifications that QAs, QCs, and food safety managers should follow or have in order to properly handle the data?
There's different training that people can take. It can really come into two different forms, so to speak. Just every food manufacturing plant, and this is not true with restaurants, they're inspected by either Silicure Laboratories or American Institute of Baking. Those are the two most highly regarded. And those organizations will provide different food safety certification classes and different topics, and you can look on the website for that to find that out. When you do restaurants, about the extent of it is a well-known restaurant is going to have their employees certified with what they call a Serve Safe training program. That's the minimum, but it's better than nothing. And then there are also other private enterprises such as SQF organizations, Safe Quality Food, and others like them that have training programs that people can pay and enroll in and take and get certified. But my experience is I've never been aware of the fact that a food company has to have a certain minimum level of training, or certain people at a certain level need to have a certain amount of training. I'm not aware of that.
Okay, a final question for you. You haven't talked much about data security. How does a company incorporate the data search, or how does an attorney incorporate that into a data search?
You know, that's a really great question, because I'm a believer from the cases that I've worked on is that if it isn't put into a secure location, it risks of being lost, stolen, forgotten. And I personally believe that a company needs to have a data security plan. And I'm not aware of a government law that says you have to have that or not, but I only mention the negative effects of not having a security plan, because if you have evidence and a case hinges on it, have a policy in place, I think that's a great way to protect yourself versus someone finding that that's full, destroying it or removing it from a preference, and you're getting into all kinds of other liable litigation. So I recommend food companies that they have a data security plan. If it's a sample of product placed in this freezer that's dedicated, there's a lock on it, and it stays there, and it's logged in and it's logged out. I know when I work as an expert witness on cases, I send product to animal laboratories. We generally take video of the product being packaged, being open at the laboratory, being run at the laboratory, so we have full documentation of everything, and I think that's normal practice of a good expert witness.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the queue. So, Darrel, would you like to make any concluding remarks?
I just want to thank everyone. This is just a favorite topic of mine. I think it's evolving topic that you're going to hear a lot more about is the transition of manual data to electronic data in food manufacturing and restaurants. And hopefully this has been beneficial to you, and it'll make you think of a lot of different things when you're working on your cases that hadn't before. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Darrel. You put a lot of time and effort into the presentation, and it definitely shows. If you'd like to speak to Dr. Suderman about a specific matter that you're working on, you can contact us here at TASA. Our telephone number is up on the screen, 800-523-2319. Tomorrow morning, as I mentioned during the introduction, I will send out a link to the archive recording of this program. In that email message, I will include a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that Darrel used during today's program. The recording of this program, as well as all of our previous programs, can be found in the TASA Knowledge Center. If you visit tasanet.com and click on the Knowledge Center tab at the top of the page, the full list of our webinars. Our next webinar for legal professionals, ferry and cruise ship passenger safety, will take place on Monday, June 24th, 2013. That's been rescheduled from June 20th. So if you had previously registered for it, it's all on Monday, June 24th. And finally, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to send me an email at any time. My email is mhyde@tasanet.com, just to put on better programs. You'll receive an email from me at 3:30 this afternoon thanking you for attending. If you do have any comments, you can just reply to that email. Being said, I will end today's program, and I look forward to seeing you at future TASA events.